When is change done?
Change is change no matter where. 70% of great change initiatives fail in their execution and they underestimate the emotional reaction to change. They have to focus on a vision for change. I do a lot of pro bono work and mentoring for particularly young emerging leaders. I feel that mentoring is something that is a responsibility of a leader. Change is constant, but the rate has changed. What happened yesterday can be quite different today.
Before we get started, please subscribe so that you never miss an episode of our cutting-edge contemporary conversations. Thank you. Welcome, Dee. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Dave. A great pleasure to be here. I'm thrilled, actually.
Thank you for coming here, and thank you for sitting with me and having this conversation. I would love to start with your background and the eclectic history you have across different continents. Could you share more about your background and experience? And then give me moments.
Okay.
Give me moments that you took that decision because of that. And
actually,
use
that's
moments.
Really interesting. And in a facilitation situation, if I was asking the same thing, I call those turning points, and they were real turning points in my own life and career, where, in actual fact, that redirected and navigated a very different pathway. But UWA described me, as you know, I have two roles at the University of Western Australia. I teach on the MBA, Master of Business Administration, in Organisational Change and Transformation, and I'm also a senior consultant with the alliance between the Business School and the Australian Institute of Management in Western Australia in the senior executive space. So I work in the C-suite with boards and the senior leadership team. Don't tend to work on the front line perspective. I think we all find our pathway in terms of, and I really love the challenge of that senior level. Again, going back to the original conversation, my profile at UWA has been very interesting in terms of the way I am profiled, which is, ask me how did I get there from nurse to New Guinea to New WA. And that was that pathway which I'm really excited to tell you about.
Yeah.
On that note, I'm always described as not a, dare I say, a one-trick pony, in the sense that I work in the areas of strategic leadership, organisational change and transformation, and governance. And in those roles, I mean, I could do, high team performance and all of those sorts of things. But I like to specialise rather than be too eclectic. I think less is more, in my opinion. And so in terms of those areas, I'm very specific about where I want to work. And what's really interesting, going back to the profile, people think, how did you go from nurse to that? In actual fact, I really stop people when they ask me that. Oh, you used to be a nurse. In our earlier conversation, the person we were talking to said, oh, Dee, you used to be a nurse. Well, I still am, because I believe all of us, Dev, are a sum total of everything we are and have been right now. Yeah. So that's the leverage that I have been privileged to use, because, for example, I've been in education, I've been in health, I've been in those things. It's not like I've stopped that and become it's just been this nice transition that's actually moved on.
Could you, in your language of turning points, your decisions from your education to your working experience, moving from one sector to the next one, could you take a few examples and then explain those turning points and the decision making you took that said, I want to be now, I want to transition to this role.
Great question. Last year, I was invited. I do a lot of pro bono work and mentoring for particularly young emerging leaders. I feel it's my quest as a leader. I feel that mentoring is something that is a responsibility
Yeah.
of a leader. So I do a lot of work in the rural and remote sector as well, from a mentoring point of view. And I was asked to be a keynote speaker at the Rural and Remote Conference last year in Perth. And, hundreds of people there, and they asked me, when they asked me to do it, I said, what's the focus of it? Tell me the focus, and so I can prepare the keynote. And they said, oh, we want you to talk about leadership. And I said, well, that's, what part of leadership do you want me to talk about? And they said, we heard you at a session. Now, I didn't know that there were spies in the camp, Dev, but I was running a session a year before, actually, with this same smaller group, just the WA branch rather than the national group. And I was talking about being an imposter. The imposter syndrome. And anyway, when the conference committee rang me and said, we'd love you to be a keynote speaker and blah, 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 I said, what's the focus? And they said, we'd like you to talk about the imposter syndrome. So I thought, that's very, very interesting. I tell my story in closed, secure environments, but to actually open up to that sort of level about imposterism in a keynote situation is a very different thing, right? And so I tell that story, and always tell my story through A.A. Milne, and I don't know whether you know A.A. Milne, that famous writer of My Friend Winnie the Pooh. And so I started the keynote with my favourite poem, and I ended it with my favourite poem, and maybe I'll share that with you. Yeah.
Please, I would love to know that poem to start with.
Yeah.
I think if you can, but if you have, it's off head, but we'd love to know that poem. But talking further on your work in the not-for-profit space and then charity space, could you describe organizational change and culture? How does that live in different at the senior executive level, and how does that transformation story happen, and what's the why the board has to think about?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things on that. Gartner, Gallup, McKinsey, et al. Do surveys every year as CEO surveys, as you know, and they ask one audacious question, which is, what are the challenges that CEOs face in the year ahead? And irrespective of machine world and AI, etc., one of the consistent things is being able to manage change. And that has not changed. So your question about how does that, how is that focused in terms of core purpose of the organisation? If we've not got, from a change point of view, if you've not got a clear, strong purpose, vision and values, and everybody understands them, you're not even off the starting block for a start, right from the get-go. So that's really, really important. In terms of your question about focusing on the not-for-profit, well, I disagree with the focus. I think change is change, no matter where, whether it's the leadership team at Rio Tinto or in a small or medium-sized not-for-profit. The issues are the same, where the leading change is seen as the most difficult thing of all. And the reason being, and really it doesn't matter about, even though the why is the core purpose, I understand that, but behaviour actually resounds itself in any type of organisation. And because I think change is, a mechanistic thing, but leading change is an emotional thing. And 75%, or 70%, John Cotter and many others will tell you this, and it's consistent. Don't know how they measure that, I might add. It is because 70% of great change initiatives fail in their execution, and you know why they do that? is because they underestimate the emotional reaction to change.
Yeah.
And so going back to your original question about the board and the leadership team, they have to focus on, a vision for change. They've got to understand and drive the purpose for change and being able to articulate that very clearly. The picture, what's the vision, what we're trying to achieve, what is the plan? Are we going to do it step by step, or are you going to pull people kicking and screaming? And what's the part that I need you to play and I will play? So let's just call the 4 Ps, but you've heard all of the acronyms of the different things. But that is how I guide conversations at whatever level and whatever type of organisation it is. So again, I'm loath to sort of support, this is just for the not-for-profit. Change is change, Dev.
You're right.
Change is change, no matter whether it's a corporate suit or, the casual, it's exactly the same.
Can I ask a naive question? When is change done?
When is change done? Interesting.
It's done. When you say it's finished.
Never done. It's never done. And I think my mantra is what I personally hold and what I advocate is that we're all a work in progress. How can change be done? And with true, absolute due respect and love, Dev, that is a ridiculous question.
I know.
That
was the idea.
A ridiculous question.
Because it's never done.
Yeah, well,
it's an
the
ongoing
reason
process.
it's not done, so change over, since time immemorial, always changed. Change, from where we were in, in cavemen and people and women, then to where we are now is change,
You're
change. But what has happened recently, and people have asked me that question many, many times, I might add, is that I want you to understand that the rate of change has accelerated.
Yeah.
So the rate of change has accelerated. Change is constant, but the rate has changed. So for example, in my world, consultants in change and also teaching change, for the want of a better word, which is a bit of an oxymoron. How can you teach change? But anyway.
Because the change would change when they're changing.
Yeah, that's right. Change is change. What's really interesting about that is that when you look at change, it's a shifting sands, because what happened yesterday can be quite different today. So for me, I have to be current, if that's a word. And again, I don't want hypocrisy in terms. So how can you be current in a changing environment? So currency, I feel I'm not behind the 8 ball. I'm not certainly way ahead of it, but at least I'm on the curve. Does that make sense? I'm on the curve, and in order to be on the curve, I need to understand AI, for example. I need to understand the collision of the machine world into our embryonic world and all of those sorts of things. This is a language, and I've been interviewed many, many times. I would not have been saying that response to your question 2 years ago. Even 2 years ago. I have IT mentors myself, and they're much younger than I. In fact, one of them's 30 years younger than I, but is so genned up on AI and its absolute fabulous use. I'm absolutely interested. In fact, on Monday, I was just being filmed at UWA for my experience working in hybrid and online situations, and what are my tricks and tips for better engagement in AI and so on. So that was very interesting in its own right.
Could we project the lessons learned of impacting change in larger organizations to an individual? There's a German philosopher, he said, he who has a why can almost bear any how.
Yeah.
Which means the purpose. You're starting with your purpose. So how does individuals who are students of change at your MBA and they are learning change, and if they are on a pathway in a corporate career in which they intend to have those roles for them, what they think and how they approach problems, and what are the skill set or a mindset of a change manager who want to influence change in larger and small organizations.
Okay, a couple of things, and I just want to focus on the word you just said, change manager. That is almost a swear word in my books. We from the get-go, and I'll just do a Shakti-Gawan creative visualization here. There's a box in the front of the room in the number 1 of the MBA class and or any senior executive program talking about change. And I'll say, can you see that box there? If anybody uses the word change manager, you've got to put some money in there and we'll send it off to a good cause afterwards. It's change leadership. Change management are just the tools and processes we use, agile, lean, all of those things. And change leadership is the engine that drives it. Because that dichotomy is not understood, that is why 70% of change management programs fail in execution, because they are not led correctly. And going back to your purpose, it's around being very, very clear about the why of the organisation and what that takes, the purpose, the picture, the plan, the part, that we as change leaders need to articulate that to those people who are on that same journey. Going back to the MBA students, that is drilled into everybody. And the evaluations commentary that I get, and I can't tell you the amount of times that the same comments come up. It was just this watershed shift in their mind of the difference between the mechanics of change management and the courage that it takes to drive the core purpose relentlessly. In fact, if you go onto the UWA website and you see my profile, it will say that Dee is committed to the relentless rate of change, to really guiding students through that. So the why, the purpose is really important. I'm a great follower of Simon Sinek, by the way. The why is one of my favourite authors, in fact, and the humility that he displays around that is fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Could you also, because, and that's why it's a swear word, the change manager.
Yes, yeah.
I'll give you
so
my
you won't use it ever again?
Yeah, I agree with it. I won't use it again. But I'll tell you this case study. I was on a consulting project with a large organization, and the board was working through the risks, and they wanted to have an action plan. So one of the risks was, as you said, change. How do we manage change? So the solution was hire a change manager, and within 6 months within 6 months, that change manager, this once lone person in a big organization of 2,000 people, got lost and burnt out, left, and then another change manager. So we ran through multiple change managers, that's the irony of being a change.
Right. And
that's
do you know why that is?
It's risk, and one person is not a solution.
That's right.
It's probably a solution for the organization and the leadership.
Spot on. And do you know that has been replicated through history in organisational structural design? For example, the same thing would apply with health and safety officer. Health and safety is everybody's responsibility.
The man in the middle.
We lead from where we stand. That's another very significant comment that I use all of the time. I'm having nothing to do with change. It's not in my job description. Yeah. And to be able to actually lead from where you stand, even if it's supporting somebody else in their own journey, no matter what level it is, that is the whole point of change. Now, I'm really glad that you sort of mentioned that little vignette about, because I can't tell you the amount of times that is replicated, even now in 2024. There's always got to be a structural design, else you'd have chaos.
Yes.
But, John Cotter himself talks about accelerated performance of organisations where we have essentially a dual operating system where we've got all these experts they've not got a badge on to say they're the CEO, but they're expert in their own, or they can be an ambassador in a frontline group and so on. So actually to see who the change leaders are within an organisation, and it doesn't necessarily have to have a badge on. I am the change manager. Goodness gracious, what a big job that would be. It's everybody's responsibility.
Could I get you to, because bureaucracy and then your work with government and you've worked with government for long, it's like the big Titanic.
Yes.
You have to move the ship in a new direction, and then it takes not just one tugboat, probably many tugboats to push the whole big Titanic. And bureaucracy naturally do not want change. That's the natural landed behavior or learned behavior across the decades. So how, first of all, I think you share your experience in terms of working with bureaucracy, and how do you bring meaningful change longer term?
Really great question actually, and I'll focus on one particular public sector agency, 36,000 employees, right?
Wow.
And bureaucracy has its own stranglehold, as you just quite rightly said. So how do you navigate through that? And the thing is that we've got to have a leadership mindset about change in the first instance. So actually focusing on the top level of change is one of the most important things, and to be able to get a committed group of leaders that can cascade that message down the organisation. There are things that are driving forces and immovable forces, and that is things like legislation. Bureaucracy is often a learnt experience, as you know, but it's also a strategic design format in an organisation as well. But one of the things that was really shifted a bureaucracy was COVID. And in this particular organisation, just after the first lockdown, I was running a senior executive program with multi-departments in the public sector. So it went from the likes of maybe corrective services to health or whatever, various things, various departments were in this session. And we were talking about, absolutely what's changing in the environment, and sort of everybody laughed as if to say, are you joking? And I mentioned the notion of how did it tip the groundswell and the bureaucratic stronghold when we had to be agile, and that is a word that lots of people use, agile processes, and with deep respect, Deb, I feel like sticking my finger down my throat when I hear it, because some people that couldn't be agile out of a paper bag about anything else, and so we were talking about what has happened in the post-COVID environment, and during that, and somebody stood up and said, what bureaucracy has held us back to make change that's usually taking 3 years to move an office, for example. We did things in 6 weeks. And for me, that really, really homes in on one of the absolute critical things about change. And dare I say, I'd like to think I've thought about it myself, but it was John Cotter himself. He said, change will not occur unless you create a sense of urgency. And so that is the language now that I use as a change consultant, for the want of a better word, around in this state of complexity and uncertainty, there is a constant level of urgency. And what I hear all the time, Deb, is that we've got to build resilience. And building resilience is one thing, but there is a residue impact of resilience, which is change fatigue. And we're seeing that in organisations, and with this never-ending changing environment, people are very tired, they're losing process, they're just working within a bureaucracy, almost like, just coming into work and then something happens in the space and they go back home, One of the biggest things around that, Dev, is to understand we've got to use the language. Instead of saying we should be resilient, let's build resilience. There's a new word of the moment, and you may think that this is just semantics, but it's endurance.
Yeah.
We've got to build endurance to the ever accelerating rate of change.
And within the bureaucracy, you have the leadership changes happening. So how do you hand over the project of change? How do you hand over to the new leadership coming that this is now you have to lead the change, and I'm leaving this role, and then you are coming to the new role. How does a new person in the leadership role?
I think the question is, you're putting the...
How do you hand over the baton?
You don't hand over change. It's a continue. As I say, I think with respect, that's a wrongly crafted question. I think, like it's not one person doing the change.
You're right.
It's actually the culture itself has got to be maintained. So it's not one person. And you might say, okay, the board leads the new direction to the CEO.
Yeah.
But the CEO himself or herself or themselves will need to absolutely be clear about the residing culture. And if the residing culture is totally opposite to what the board wants, now there is the change, because that's an edict from above, as it were. But I think the first thing in handing over, for the want of a better word, is to understand number one, the charter of the organisation, what the core purpose is, what the vision is, and what the core values are, and how does that, match up, for the want of a better word, with the residing culture. And that is what is the brief per se for the new change leader.
Yeah. And
does that make sense?
Very much, very much. And thank you for reframing the context.
And it is a reframing.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really great word, because that's how I approach working with senior. They will say, change management. And I'll say, well, yeah, we have the tools and processes, but let's actually talk about the leadership. What does that mean? It's the engine that drives it.
From a context of most of the government departments would lead into human services, and the end beneficiary is a citizen. And when change is not at the base of what it should be, and when the whole bureaucracy, the machine, is not moving at the base, it leads to higher anxiety, delay of services to the citizens, and that gap keeps on adding and keeps on building on. The cumulative effect.
It's a bit of that change fatigue that sets in at the top, and that's cascading down to the end.
Which might lead to confusion, and so many more things. So how do you see that playing in the current format of you working, and what's your observation on those things happening in those projects we are working on?
Okay, well, a couple of things. I'll just rise up to more solution focus on that. And so first of all, I will look at how they measure impact. And you know all about social impact, right? And it's sometimes a question that stumps people. How do you measure the impact? I have when I'm doing strategic planning, I have a really sort of an in-your-face comment, and I'll share it with you.
Please.
And it is, what is the value that you bring to the people you serve?
Very powerful.
What is the value that you bring to? And I ask them to go into their groups and discuss that. And the challenge, even at senior exec, to really articulate that is not easy. Okay. And so there are frameworks. And so everybody, particularly the corporate sector, tends to use an aberration of a balanced scorecard to measure the performance of the organisation. Would you agree? So we've got, the financial results of the organisation. We've got the effective business processes of the organisation. We've got the ability to develop and learn and grow the capability and capacity of the organisation. And then over here is the community that we serve, and it is our product fit for service, etc., etc. And in the middle of that balanced scorecard, you've got the vision, the values, and the purpose, and how it is all aligned, right? So what has that got to do with your question? Well, I add an element to that. So as you know, the balanced scorecard is about ROI, so ROI. So I add ROI and SROI. So return of investment and social return of investment. And that also stumps people. Well, let's get back to this. No. Whether it is a corporate organisation, such a big resource company, who have to sign off on their social development goals, their SDGs, and they've got to be very clear about environmental social governance, blah, blah, blah. So we can't isolate social purpose only to charitable or not-for-profit organisations. That's a myth, in actual fact. Yet corporate organisations have got to show that. And they're probably more effective at showing that than the not-for-profit agencies have been in the past. So, for example, doing strategic planning, going very recently with a large not-for-profit, asking that same question. Oh, well, we provide disability services on the page care, and we do this and we do that. I said, yes, I know what you do. I said, but why do you do it? So again, that purpose. And even then, interesting, it was not easy for them to articulate that purpose. So using, and I don't want to sound too clinical on this, but using some hard measures to really actually show that has been quite revelationary in some ways. Does that make sense?
You're right. And in the most recent year and probably more than a decade, there's a change of language when people publish their annual reports. They're starting publishing outcomes, and then the conversation between outcomes and outputs. So we have, so what has happened essentially is they are still measuring outputs but calling them outcomes. And still it's in the face, you can see and tell it's not an outcome, which is a social impact indicators or SROI. It is not those things, it is clearly outputs. How many hours of service you have delivered.
They're just targets.
And there is just targets, they're outputs. And the majority of the people who are working in social impact space, or if they are publishing social impact parameters or indicators, they are publishing primarily outputs under the heading of outcomes. So, and that's happening not just in NFPs, but for-profits and government departments. So how does this just a tokenistic change of language do nothing or something?
Interesting, and I think you can go to any strategy plan, just go on Google, and no matter what type of organisation, and they've all got, whether it's strategic priorities, strategic intents, measures, targets, blah, blah, blah. So you've got to be very, very clear about the consistent language that you're using, because there is so many different interpretations of that. So I don't have a clear, guided answer to that one. I would say you have to be very, very clear about what you're driving towards, what the vision is in the first place. And to be able, and I don't want to go back to the norm of be specific, be measurable. Give it a time that you're going to do it, and making sure that it's not so up in the air that you'll never achieve it because it looks good on paper. So going back to that age-old tradition of SMART is really important. And however you put a tag on that, And you can go yourself and you can see all the different areas. I mean, you beautifully articulated, was it this, was it that, was it outcomes, was it outputs, was it this? So long as the organisation are very, very clearly able to articulate that in a language that everybody understands is the whole thing.
And another thing from a change point of view, and which is the language used, incentives drive behaviors.
Yes.
That drives culture. And if you want to bring long-term permanent change or long-term change ideology or behaviors, and if the incentives are wrong, it will fall flat. So what's your views on incentives driving behavior, and how do you align incentives with the perspective of the change?
That's a very easy answer. Is that you recruit against the values of the organisation. The values of the organisation are irrefutable. Where you've got behaviours are opposing the values, then you've got a wrong fit right from the beginning. How do you measure values if you've not written the KVIs, the key value indicators, underneath those values? We can have all the rhetoric about honesty, integrity, and you walk outside the door and people are stabbing you in the back. So there are two things around that, is how do you keep that alignment? How do you keep a values-driven organisation of high performance? You've got to be prepared for the relentless change and having the courage to have difficult conversations. And I don't call them difficult conversations, they're courageous conversations. Where you've got leaders who cannot keep in check poor behaviour, it starts to absolutely increase exponentially. So having courageous conversations is a really inherent skill that leaders need to have.
I want you to help me define the word leadership, but there are new tags every few years. People take new tags on the leadership style, and then now I am a servant leader, and so it keep on changing across changing of times. But what, in terms of the core underneath the surface, what has always worked, and what are the key mindsets and key behaviors and key values will always work to be a great leader?
I am really delighted you asked me that question, because I get asked that question all of the time, right? And it would have been remiss of you not to ask that. I will start off by telling a bit about my story in terms of how that sort of matches up with what you just asked. I used to think that leadership was about power and control. That if we follow the traditional leader-follower role, you've got a followership of millions of people. Well, Adolf Hitler would be a good example of that, even posthumously. Conversely, you've got this powerful creature like Mother Teresa, for example, who's a leader-follower. You couldn't get two opposites, but if you go through the leader-follower, it would be same, yeah? So my view of leadership was always about power and control. And that bode me very, very well. I was Nurse of the Year when I was 23. I was a young director in a large teaching hospital when I was only 29. And I came to Australia and I had to, change my way of thinking. Some of my qualifications were not recognised at that time. My nursing degrees were, obviously, but then I had to move and rise back up again from in a different country, and many people have the same issues. And in that rise up to getting up to the same position again, I did a master's degree, and I did a master's degree in leadership. And it was an inaugural master's degree at Curtin at the time. And I remember the first unit, literally the first day that I was there, and it makes the hairs on my arms stand up on end when I think about it, because it was such a exponential shift in my head. Talk about those turning points, yeah? This was a big one. And leadership is the most studied of the social sciences. over 100 years, if you like, and still nobody has a true definition of leadership. Okay, so is it leader-follower? Is it servant leadership? Is it authentic leadership? Is it transformational leadership? Is it situational leadership? Is it blah, 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 blah.
I should dare not say Machiavellian.
That's right, okay. That's not to say that one, yeah,
I dare not say that.
So forget which academic is talking or getting his or her them, identity for coming up with this new definition of leadership. Leadership is something to live into, not to live up to.
Yeah.
I loved that. Leadership has no hierarchy. It is something we can lead from where we stand. If we are the cleaning toilets, we can do that to the best of our ability. Where leadership has been focused, you can see I'm getting passionate about this. Where leadership has been focused on a badge of hierarchy, that is where the damage has been done. We can lead, that is a role. Leader role is different to leadership. We'd like to think there is a hand-in-glove perspective on that, and let's hope, but I have seen so-called leaders who could not lead themselves down the garden path, let alone lead many people. We need to be coming from a personal value base that aligns with the organisation. We need to be able to have a purposeful behaviour that everybody can follow in that regard. There are three things that I think that is undersold in leadership, is that they think leadership is a position. Number two, you've got to have a very senior role before you're perceived as a leader. And you're isolated as a leader. If you have any of those three things, then your, journey of leadership is going to fail, in my opinion. Does that make sense?
Very much, I think. Thanks for sharing that perspective and with that context. From a leadership point of view, some organizations, primarily in the not-for-profit space, are trialing the model of co-CEOs. So instead of one CEO which leads the organization, you have two CEOs with different mindset, but they're working together.
Yeah.
And how do you see that two CEOs or co-CEO model effective in terms of change, culture, behaviors, and long-term leadership?
Well, I think it's not a new concept, and I think you can forget using the shared CEO role and say shared position, a co-position. That has been around since time immemorial, I might add, and it fails significantly unless you have a clear shared vision. So we can have two completely different core capability statements, and you can climb a mountain, I can ski down the mountain. Okay, so, but it's all about the mountain. If we are not sure about what that mountain is, we can go on completely different directions. And it is problematic unless it is well thought out, it's well structured, it's well measured, they meet in the middle, they're not too isolated, and you've probably seen it fail exponentially when there's not that joint core purpose. And it's also confusing for the people that is cascading down to two different messages altogether. So it's problematic. It can work in terms of, and another really good example is, I only work part-time, where there's a part-time sort of mindset rather than a shared purpose. That's where it becomes problematic.
Thank you.